I would like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Stephen F. from Staten Island.
Good evening, family. My name's Steve. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 1st, 2003, and my home group is Serenity Lounge. We meet Thursday nights in Staten Island. We're also a beginner's format with a concentration on steps 1, 2, and 3. Thank Anthony for the invite to coming down and sharing tonight with you. I always get uncomfortable before I speak. There's always a level of fear, and there's always a level of anxiousness. And it was Zoom or no Zoom, it was always there. Two of my biggest fears that fueled my alcoholism, and alcohol definitely treated, is fear of not being good enough and fear of what you think about me. And when I'm in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous, I can look at your face and see your reactions, be like, oh, that didn't work so well, or oh, this and all that. But now I got to look around at the dysfunctional Hollywood squares and kind of be like, oh man, what is this? And I always take a minute before I speak to just really just share openly and honestly with you guys, and not try to keep any airs, and share my experience, my strength, and my hope. And knowing full well that I always start anytime I get the opportunity to share that I know that my life today is boiled down to two things, and I believe it with every fiber of my being. Moment to moment, I may not experience, I may not feel it, but I know it when I get quiet and I get still, that anything in my life today boils down to God's grace and Alcoholics Anonymous. The life that I have today was only possible because of those two things. And my journey in sobriety shows that as well, that any time I have suffered more from self-sufficiency and hopefully delved more into the steps, more into relationship with God, He has produced things in my life that were absolutely unfathomable 17 years ago. I had said my sobriety date's December 1st, 2003, and by God's grace, I just came up on a AA non-belly button birthday. And it's been a crazy little thing especially over the last 2 years, because now the time that I'm sober kind of exceeds the time that I drank. And my sober reference point and my life reference point now is based on 17 years of not having to pay the cost or consequence of thinking that alcohol was going to treat my alcoholism, and seeing that I can get through things. Things can happen to me. Good things can happen to me. Bad things that can happen to me. And I don't have to buy into the lie that alcohol is going to treat my alcoholism, regardless of what circumstances may look like. I apologize in advance. When I speak, I try to be very linear, but the one thing I'm talking, and the next thing you know, I'm jumping from 1998 to 2010 to this to that. So if you can follow, I appreciate it, and you have a similar brain to myself. But tonight I will try to be as linear as possible, and probably fail miserably. So warning. My first drink this is my childhood room that I was in before I moved upstairs into the house. And my first drink was just down the block. Pretty much lived here my whole life since I was 3 years old. My parents moved here when I was 3. And first time I took his drink was just out the door, down the block, and over on Cloverdale. And me, my best friend Danny, were walking, and we found a piss-warm beer bowl and a pack of Cool cigarettes. And we proceeded to smoke the Cool cigarettes and drink the piss-warm beer bowl covered in leaves that we had no idea how long it was sitting there. And I don't remember the warm beer disgusting feeling. I do remember that Chris walked down the woods, Kevin walked down the woods, and Donnie walked down the woods. And there was something that occurred in that moment, and an association that was built that didn't happen with my permission, that there was an effect that alcohol had on me at that moment and that time. And I proceeded to hang out with those kids, and I felt there was something different. There was something going on. I didn't have big book language. I didn't have perceptions or ideas of what alcoholism looked like. I just knew that for that moment, I kind of felt like I fit. And that's the thing I chased ever since that moment and ever since that time. I didn't have the language of the big book Alcoholics Anonymous when it comes to the doctor's opinion that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. I didn't know that. It took getting sober to see that, and looking back at my experience, and thank God for literature and sponsorship, and having to learn about the disease of alcoholism, a disease I didn't think I had. Because anytime from that first drink, and I will again attempt to be linear, but when I came into AA, this perception to me, and prior to that, is an alcoholic was a Bowery bum with a trench coat, cut off gloves, a 50-gallon drum with fire spewing out of it, drinking out of a brown paper bag. And since I didn't fit that picture, I must not be an alcoholic. And I had to learn through AA members, through literature about the disease of alcoholism and how it shows up in the alcoholic, not how it shows up perceived in my mind, and that thing that blocks me from really coming down to my truth. Before the meeting, I shut my video off, said my set-aside prayer, because the last thing I want to do is speak to impress. I want to be able to share openly and honest with you, especially about the struggles in sobriety as well. I know this is a new meeting, newcomers meeting and everything, but I know that if I don't remain in the circle of Alcoholics Anonymous and do the things that have been suggested and that I've been voluntold to do by sponsors and different people, I could buy into the lie that drinking will treat alcoholism yet again. Grew up in this neighborhood my entire life. That first drink occurred down here. My childhood grammar school's a couple of blocks away, St. Clair. I went there for a couple of years. I went there until 7th grade, and I left there at 7th grade because the kids were making fun of me because I was fat. And I used to get called thunder thighs and all this different stuff. And I know just all this, childhood stuff. So what I did was I said, I begged my parents and they sent me to public school. And kids in public school are just as mean as kids in Catholic school. So I went back to the Catholic school, and I went back and I did 8th grade at St. Clair again. So I left Catholic school, went to public school, be like, oh, wow, these people suck too. And then I went back to my Catholic grammar school. Wasn't drinking back then. Definitely had a way about me that wanted attention. There was this kid, Matt, that I would always pick fights with and get my butt kicked because I picked fights with Matt, and I was just, getting this attention and looking at the, trying to, I don't know, be somebody, but just be recognized. Because I think that's something that we all have, that human side of us. We do want to be recognized, and alcohol definitely fueled that inside of me, that I felt recognized and I felt a part of something. From there, I went to and this is where alcohol really, really first took. It didn't take hold of me, but it was another experience that I had with the bottle. I proceeded to go my freshman year of high school to a pre-seminary school in Manhattan. It was Cathedral Preparatory Seminary. And I'd be lying to you if I think that, I had this vocation and I knew I wanted to be a priest. All I knew is that my best friend Krishna was going to go, and why not do things that, people around you are going to do and they want to do, and you'll fit right into that. And I went to this school, and it was an incredible experience. It was an incredible school. I lived in a multi-million-dollar brownstone at 86th Street by Central Park. Would walk down and go to school. I'd live there during the week, and then I'd come home on the weekends. During the week, we'd go to mass every day. I'd serve mass. We were the altar boys for St. Patrick's Cathedral. So we would get up in the morning. We'd take the train down to Rockefeller Center. We'd get in there. We'd go and serve mass with Cardinal O'Connor at that time. I got my first autograph from Al Roker, the weatherman, at that time. So I was like, oh, that's cool. It's like the only autograph I ever got. So like the most famous person I ever met was like a weatherman. And that year, I found, two things. I found Jameson's Irish whiskey, of which I stole out of the priest's liquor cabinet, and I was ratted out about that, and they told on that, and I had to make that right, and they told my parents. So me and another guy stole Jameson's Irish whiskey from their liquor cabinet, proceeded to drink it, and proceeded to get ratted out. And I also found the disease of bulimia. It was first time I ever binged and purged at the same time as I picked up a drink. And I'm someone that believes my alcoholism shows up in a lot of different ways, and hopefully my experience will get into that too. Because that hole inside of me and that void I've always felt that void, and booze filled it up and other things can fill it up. And I'm blindly arrogant if I think that alcohol does not show up in other ways. And I'm grateful for sponsorship too, and men challenging me and saying, Stephen, where else is alcohol showing up in non-liquid form in your life? And it took an experience to be able to look that. It took an experience to be able to see that alcoholism shows up in my character defects. It shows up here and it shows up there. But I had to come to see that and believe that and have that experience later on. I had to really get down to the brass tacks of finding out that I have a disease that wants me dead, will settle for me drunk, or settle for miserable enough sober that I think a drink is going to fix everything yet again. So I finished that high school, came back to Staten Island because, of course, I don't want to be a priest. I don't want to do this. I lived up there for a year, had some great experiences. Came back, went to a Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school here, got on the wrestling team, and loved that. I loved wrestling. And then, that's when drinking started happening, where it was a summertime thing. And then it was, a thing that I would do. And I knew there was always something a little off with how I drank back then. I drank for the effect. Like, we had these concerts in Gateway in Staten Island in this park. And I always remember that, like, me and my friends, we would go and get the 40s of Crazy Horse. And I would always end up getting 3 40s of Crazy Horse while everyone got a 40 of Crazy Horse, because there was something inside of me telling me that 140 of Crazy Horse isn't going to do it. You got a pregame drink there, and then you're going to need another 40 of Crazy Horse afterwards. And you're definitely not going to get through that third 40 of Crazy Horse, but you might as well have it anyway. So, and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't do any other non-conference approved things at that time. I picked up, smoked pot for the first time my senior year of high school. And then drinking was taking an important and exhilarating part of my life. I didn't know Bill's story back then, but it started creeping in. It started producing things inside of me. It started building a persona around it. It started, fitting in. That conscious separation wasn't there when I drank. And it was probably my freshman year, I had ended up getting in from senior year I went to Oneonta. And Oneonta back in the 90s was, the premier party school in New York State. And I was on the accelerated program. I came home after 7 weeks when I cried to mommy and daddy that I was burning my life to the ground and I'm wasting your money and this and that. I'm pledging a fraternity. I'm eating raw onions. I'm doing all this crazy stuff. I'm not going to school. I'm not doing any of that. But during that time, I pledged a fraternity. And they loved me in the fraternity because I just showed up. Like, I was the guy. I was the man in a lot of different ways. And we had nights there in Rushing where one night was gin and tonics and hydroponics. And that's when I fell in love with gin. And my romance and my relationship with alcohol really took off at that moment. We had another night called Bloody Marys and Blunts. And I was, doing a lot of the Blunts part of it. The Bloody Marys, not so much. I like my clam juice when I can dip some Italian bread in it and everything like that. But see, it's really like it's something funny. I can't tell. In a room, maybe people chuckle, but not now. So we'll go on. That's the thing about Zoom. It's so great, but so gin and tonics and hydroponics really started something off inside of me. And I left Oneonta, came home. Had to go to college, had to do this, had to do that. Got a job at a gas station. And I was working at a gas station, and I used to subsidize my non-conference approved weed habit by lying and cheating to the customers, where what I would do is if you wanted gas and you wanted like $15, what I would do is I would give you $12.50. And if I got caught, I'd be like, oh, I put the numbers in wrong. And I would keep the other $3.50 to myself to cover the $15. And I was doing these little stupid little things because we'd buy a quarter ounce, we'd smoke and do all this. But there was another thing that occurred at that moment that I didn't realize that actually happened that fueled the disease of alcoholism for me. Is we used to work there, and one night me and my friend go out, and we go out drinking all night, and the gas station was getting robbed at the time. And we ended up drinking and going to this place and then going to another place, went to a strip club, yada, 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 and ran out of money. And I continued to want to drink. And the other guy was pretty much okay with what was going on. So I said, okay, what we'll do is we'll go rob the gas station. We have to work the next day. So what we'll do is we'll rob the gas station and we'll just stay out all night. And we'll show up at work. It's getting robbed anyway. So we went into the gas station. We took the $80 single packs, like $40 for one guy, $40 for the other guy. And we proceeded to go and drink for the evening. Went to work. Danny pretty much slept in the car all day, and I ended up working the whole day. I didn't know that there was that phenomenon of craving that was going on inside of me that wasn't going on inside of Danny. I didn't realize that I couldn't, shut off the switch, because once I had taken that drink, there was something going on in me that wasn't going on in my friend. And I didn't realize that until AA. I didn't realize that till sponsorship. I didn't realize that until going through the literature, and actually reading the black words and the white pages and experiencing that kind of stuff, and going through that delusion that an alcoholic is a Bowery bum, cut off gloves, trench coat, 50-gallon drum with fire spewing out of it in a brown paper bag. I didn't realize that, because that's still what my mind had told me. So fast forward quite a bit of years, the drinking is getting excessive, the other substances are getting excessive, and I didn't really go so far in the other substances, but alcohol was my thing. Alcohol was my main thing. Gin did for me what life couldn't, what love couldn't, what family couldn't. And I did not have a bad childhood by any means. I had things that happened to me and things that were done and things that, I didn't like and stuff, but there was just that separation and that void, and alcohol took that away. It allowed me to be free and feel a part of and feel a togetherness and a unity. And these are common things that we hear in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings that aren't anything original or anything new. It's like we all have that common language of that separation, and alcohol filled that void inside of us. It did for us what life couldn't. So continuing on, it's, things are getting worse also mentally. I started deteriorating mentally quite a bit when I was in a relationship, and Pandora's box was kind of open for me, and I realized some things that had happened to me as a child that were kind of stuffed away, put inside in a lockbox, and shoved in the attic with some cobwebs and dust, and I didn't want to think about it or realize it. And something happened, and there was a mental break, and there was a mental shift that it just happened. And there was years from 1990s, I guess 97, 96, 97, up until when I got sober in 2003, where I was clinically showing up and diagnosed schizoaffective, paranoid personality, bipolar, manic, a whole bunch of different things. Again, not thinking I was alcoholic. I went to several different therapists. I went to, tried to do so many different things to treat what was going on, not knowing what I had to really treat, because you were taking like that life preserver away from me, and I didn't realize that, but it was manifesting a lot of different DSM-4 diagnoses at that time. I'm also very grandiose in my care. Who was going to help me? For a while, I used to go to a hypnotherapist. And I worked in South Jersey for AT&T. It was, a couple of years before I got sober, maybe 2 years. And I would go to this hypnotherapist in Chestnut Ridge, New York. Meanwhile, I worked in Cranberry, New Jersey, and I would drive once a week to go see this therapist in Chestnut Ridge, New York, a hypnotherapist, because he got struck by lightning and lived to tell about it. And if there was anyone that was going to help me, it was a therapist who got struck by lightning and being able to. So I was like, I sought that guy out to be like, okay, this is the guy who's going to help me. And medication started coming into it. There was my first suicide attempt in probably around 1998, failed suicide attempt. And that's when antipsychotics started coming into the equation, because I was manifesting and showing up that way. I remember the first suicide attempt, I had woken up and felt like a failure. By the end of the day, I had told my father what had happened, and he brought me to my childhood therapist. And from there, I went to my first psych ward. And I remember being there and at the intake and literally convulsing and shaking and slamming my head up against the concrete wall and having to be shot down with Haldol. And that's the way I was showing up. And that continued to be the way for another probably about, I guess it would be 4 years then. Drinking progressively more, other substances more, paranoia, crazy relationships, crazy. I was literally just before I got sober, I was in a relationship, and severe paranoia, and I wasn't smoking any drugs or anything. It was just showing up that way. No matter how much I drank, it didn't take it away. I either had to prove a thought right or I had to prove a thought wrong. And unless I proved that thought right or I proved it wrong, I couldn't find peace. And this relationship I was in, I used to drive to the person's house, look on one side of the street to see if I knew cars that were coming a certain way, and then drive by the house, go by a friend's house, put my hand on a car hood to see if it was warm. Like there was some serious stuff going on. I guess it's around now 2003, just before I got sober, my mom got sick. She had been in remission 10 years from malignant melanoma. And she got sick while she was up in Alaska. We had to go through this whole ordeal to get her home. Got her home, and she ended up going up to Sloan Kettering up there. And prior to that, I had gone to Vegas while they were up just before there. And I used this idea and to my parents, and I said, I'm going to go to Vegas. And when I come back from Vegas, I'm going to not do these things. I'm not going to drink. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to change. I'm going to do better. And there was numerous times that I told that to them, numerous times that kind of excuse would come up, and I would say, I'm going to change. I'm going to be better, not drink, not do this, not do that. And I meant it. And I pulled it off for a little bit until my mom got sick, and I went up to Sloan Kettering, and my mom was really only responding to me. So I stayed out of work that night, slept in the hospital, and then the thought came to me just to go outside, get a little breather. And I went up the block, and I went to a bar, and I had a couple of glasses of wine, and just a couple. That was it. And from there, I went to a church. I said an honest prayer. And the next day, my mom was like, okay. Like, she was cognizant. She wasn't okay, but she was cognizant. She kind of remembered things. And we ended up getting her from there, transferred to Staten Island University Hospital, local hospital where I live. And from there, she deteriorated. And on September 3rd, 2002, at 8:30 at night, 8:34, she passed away from malignant melanoma on hospice in the living room with 10 of us around her. And I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know that lack of power was my dilemma. I didn't know that I was making a decision that I couldn't pull off because I didn't have the power to make that decision in the first place. When I knelt down and I said to her, Mom, I'm going to change. I'm going to be better. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to smoke. And if you gave me a lie detector test, I would have passed it with flying colors because I meant it with every fiber of my being. 3 days later, I'm passed out in a cold slab of concrete in the backyard of my house, having sworn that to her on her diet, and as she laid there in a hospice bed in the living room and died. I didn't know what was really going on with me. I didn't know that I had this disease of alcoholism. I did know that I was diagnosed a whole bunch of different things and showing up that way, and a host of different types of medications, on a host of different types of therapies. And from there, that's my last year of drinking. I ended up at that time going up to City Island. There was a priest, Father Bob Moore, who was my parish priest, and also one of the priests that I lived with at Cathedral Prep. So I went up to see Father Bob, and I was talking to him about my life, talking about things that were going on, just divulging a whole bunch of stuff to him. And he said, Stephen, I think you're an alcoholic. And at that time, I would have taken anything. It was like one of those Velcro balls you threw and it stuck. And there was something about what he said and how he said it. And I was willing and I was open to the idea of that. So the next day I met the hand of AA. I always think of that as our responsibility statement. The first time I've ever seen or got the example of a responsibility statement. Monsignor Jeff came to my house, picked me up at 12:30 and took me to a 1 o'clock meeting at Drumgoole. And I didn't stay in Alcoholics Anonymous. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. But my brain still told me at that time is that you're not an alcoholic because you're not a Bowery bum with a trench coat, a 50-gallon drum, fire spewing out of it, and a brown paper bag. And since you're not that, you can't be this, so you can't belong in a place like this. So it took me a little more time to ferment and marinate. And what had occurred is on November of 2003, my father was away in London. He was on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. I'm home as a 27-year-old man-child. Home doing what I want to do in his house and everything like that. He's, away. It's Thanksgiving. He's away from the family. So it's, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm drinking. Friday, I go to a wedding. I get completely done the whole week. And then Friday, just, put the nail in the coffin, go to the wedding, get completely ossified, go out afterwards. My friends want to go home. I don't go home. I'm still doing what I need to do because, I'm not knowing that there's something going on inside of me that they're not experiencing. I come home. Saturday, I lay in bed all day. I'm seeing things. I'm feeling things. I'm shaking. I should be, probably should have drank. It would have made me feel better. And I didn't. I laid there in bed the whole day. I woke up on Sunday morning and I said those words yet again. I want to change. I want to be better. I want to live better. I don't want to drink. I don't want to do that. I don't want to live this way at all. And I go Christmas shopping. I go looking into a judo class because, of course, I'm so grandiose as a wrestler in high school that I want to get into judo. You push, I pull. I don't believe in violence towards people and all this grandiose, crazy stuff in my brain. And I've never been a violent person. I've maybe hit 2 people in my life out of anger. My anger has always been interior, directed, a sense of self-loathing, a sense of disqualification with life and with others. I would put cigarettes out on various parts of my body prior to that day, and I would always think that it's because I didn't feel anything. And the truth is I felt everything. I felt every feeling. I thought every thought for you and for myself, and the brain would not shut down. And of course, I was manifesting mentally ill at that time. So I go and I go Christmas shopping, go into the judo class, and the next thing you know, the thought comes to me, and a simple little thought that would make today better as a bottle of Tanqueray 10. And that's all it took, was a simple thought. No idea about the mental defense against the first drink, no idea about, alcoholism being cunning, baffling, powerful, and as I'm reminded by sponsor, patient. No idea about that idea of what alcoholism really is. It was simply a thought that drowned out all other thoughts. And I went to this bar and I proceeded to drink my gin and tonics. I got a phone call from a friend. My brain snapped. I came home. My father was away. Literally Fade to Black by Metallica was playing in the background. I used to minimize this and say it was like an after school special on Channel 4 that you used to watch about the kids drinking and doing all this stuff. And I walked into the house and I was ready to go the long way in my wrist. I was a biology major at the time, also trying to be on the FDNY at the time. And I was going to go the long way. Again, my father is however many thousand miles away on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to commit the most selfish act that anyone can commit, and not caring that how someone's going to find me, what my brother and anyone's going to think. This is the only way out that I had. The insanity that was going on between my two ears and manifested around me was unbearable. And I was going to go the long way and bleed out. And during that time, there was a phone call that happened, and I, for some reason, picked up the phone. My friend Nicole had called begging me for money, and I started screaming at her and telling her what was going on and what I was doing and this and that. And it's blurry of what happened before or after, but again, I told you I used to, put cigarettes out on my arm and stuff. So I took a knife, I heated it on the stove until it was orange, and in some symbolic way, multiple times I attempted to burn my heart out of my chest. That's the best I had. That was it. That's the best I had 17 years ago. And as I lay on the living room floor with my flesh pretty much singed open on the carpet, I hear a knock on the door, and it's the EMTs. And this is, again, the best I had to offer. I was trying to be a firefighter at that time, and I said these words: I refuse medical attention. That's how I showed up to life. That's the best I had. And then I heard another knock on the door, and it was my best friend who grew up, on the other side of the street, a couple of houses up, Frankie. And he said, "Steve, it's me." He had heard suicide attempt at 86 Elmwood Avenue, and he was always all the way on the other side of Staten Island on the North Shore, and he came from that jurisdiction straight to the house. And I like to believe, and I like to really, really know that that's when God interrupted my death, because there was a level of brokenness that I never experienced before in my life. And I believe at that moment, the possibility of being broken open actually occurred. From there, I went to, after that night, they went down to the Staten Island North, and then they transferred me to Staten Island South, where they had the psych ward, and I stayed there for 10 days in a pretty big blizzard of 2003. And from there, I went to 450 Seaview across from Staten Island University, and I was there 5 days a week. My daddy would drive me. My daddy would pick me up. He's 28 almost by then. He'd have to pick me up and take me home. because I'm sure he was scared, and he had every reason to be, and he had every thought to be that, he didn't know if his son was going to be okay. My brother didn't know if his brother was going to be okay for many years. And from there, I went to Bridge Back to Life, an outpatient program. And there I met a guy named Tommy, who took me to my first meeting, or my reintroduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went to my first meeting, again, of Alcoholics Anonymous, my old home group, Decker Avenue Step. And from there, I was open enough to lay aside the ideas of what I thought alcoholism was and how it showed up. And from there, I got a sponsor. And from there, I started learning about alcoholism as Alcoholics Anonymous talks about alcoholism, how Alcoholics Anonymous talks about alcoholism in its literature, in the 12 and 12. The home group was a 12 and 12 meeting back then, and we'd read the 12 and 12 every week. And then I go and sit at my sponsor Tommy's house each week, and we'd start reading the book. And I remember I had said it earlier, the first thing I identified with in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and what I had gone through, and when I get the opportunity to take other men through, we change statements into questions, cross out the he's and put I's, and the we's and put I's, and put our names and personalize it. And that line in the doctor's opinion where it says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The words are crossed out men and women, and it put did Steve there, and the answer is duh. That's the only reason I drank. Because the effect produced by gin produced a far better effect than anything in my life could have occurred. From the way I showed up, and the best I had on November 30th, 2003, to even, well prior to that. There was something that alcohol did inside of me. I didn't know alcohol was treating alcoholism. I didn't know that just yet. But that's the first thing that piqued my interest. The other thing that piqued my interest was in Bill's story where I remember talking to him about it last year, and 2 years ago at our men's retreat, and I was like, Tom, you never lied to me. And in Bill's story, it says, quite as important, we would see that spiritual principles would solve all our problems. And I hung on to that because the way I showed up and the way I manifested in those first couple of years, of even in sobriety, still taking antipsychotic medication, going to therapists, still dealing with that stuff. Like, I didn't think it was going to happen for a guy like me. I didn't think that was ever going to be the case. I thought I was going to be, looking at this disease of alcoholism and mentally ill for the rest of my life. During that time, though, I'm going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I probably said the most honest thing I've ever said in the rooms of AA. When I would go to meetings a lot, because I was laid off, I was on a disability at work at that time. And I would say, my name is Steve. I have a desire to stop drinking. Because I couldn't say the word alcoholic because my brain still said, Bowery bum, 50-gallon drum, this image of what an alcoholic was. And I would, and be honest about that in the very beginning and say that my name is Steve. I have a desire to stop drinking. And going through the work with Tommy, it changed to my name's Steve. I'm an alcoholic. And it changed to, realizing that I have this disease of alcoholism. And, I never had a problem with God. I never had I've always had a belief in a higher power. I went to a pre-seminary school. And I loved all of it. I loved learning Latin. I don't remember anything, Mene Patre, Christi, Spiritual Sante. Like, I could say the sign of the cross in Latin, but I don't know anything else in Latin. I can recite the Mass. I would go every day. But I know there was something even back then that was filling me up, and not in a vocational kind of way, but there was something that was going on that was filling me up when I went to that place. And I loved the experience there. And I didn't get to share about Father Bob. Father Bob, we don't know where he is. He's no longer a priest. He's probably gave up his priesthood, and he may possibly be dead. And found this out just, maybe a year ago, that they haven't heard from or anything. But I also found out that the man who 12-stepped him, his sobriety date was December 1st, 20 years prior, or 30 years prior to then when I came in. And I don't take that as coincidence. I take that as providence. Like, I believe I believe all that stuff. I believe that, those blinks, those, like those glimpses from God, and a blink from him, and a wink rather. And I don't believe that wasn't anything but divine, that the man who 12-stepped me, the man who 12-stepped him had the same exact anniversary date, 30 years prior. during that first year, I know this is a newcomers meeting and stuff, and I went to meetings. I did what I had to do. I was sponsored. I did my step work. I started really experiencing that stuff and asking myself those hard questions and remember getting on my knees in step 3. And step 2 back then meant sanity in a different way because I was literally insane in a lot of different ways. But I remember getting on my knees in the 3rd step and really snot bubbling, like crying and not being able to speak words. And there was just something that occurred in that moment. And that foundation in 1, 2, and 3 is something I've always gone back to and had to. Like I had said, my home group is, a 1, 2, and 3 meeting. And I'm so grateful for sponsorship that it gave me a firm foundation in my powerlessness and unmanageability, the belief that God could and would if he was sought, and then making that decision to turn my will and my life over to him and continuing to be willing to do that as I've remained sober and continuing to look at the lens of that where it's not showing up as gin, it's showing up as other things, and making a decision to really allow God to steer my life and do these things and hopefully experience more humility and experience more of an outpouring of grace. Doing that first honest 4th step, as honest as it could be at that time, and walking out of Tommy's basement, sharing everything on that 5th step and feeling really free and really connected. And he said a couple of words to me that I heard from therapists in a lot of different ways. But there was something about the effort put in, the realization of powerlessness and unmanageability when it came to the bottle, the mental blank spot, the strange, peculiar twist. And those experiences I kind of shared with you, they started coming alive. Like, why do I drink differently than my friends? Why do they go home and I don't? Why do I feel like, that I always have to fuel that thing inside of me? Why, when I go home, I park my car in a certain direction in an after hours place, I drop them off and then my car doesn't make it home. It goes somewhere else. Like that phenomenon of craving, the language started coming alive when I look back at the experiences of which I had. And he had said to me, Stephen, do you realize how much power that situation has had over you? And talking about something that occurred to me when I was a child, sexual abuse. And it washed away. It absolutely washed away at that moment. It was gone. It has not come back. It may come back in a way of, the narrative in my life, but not directly related to that incident by any stretch of the imagination. It fueled a lot of my paranoia, fueled a lot of trust issues, fueled a lot of, love being an enemy, trust being an enemy, and it was gone. Got the opportunity to then glaze over 6 and 7, read a paragraph, say a prayer, make a list, do what I was told, say, my creator, I'm willing that you should have all of me, good and bad, and do that, and being aware. And, I'm a very aware alcoholic. The question is, do I take action with the awareness, as I'm reminded very much by my current sponsor. Went out there and repaired the damage of my past and started building relationships with my family again. And, my father, first off, my dad is awesome. I love my father so much. He's like, I had a lot of resentments towards him and a lot of fixed and old ideas, but my father was the first example of man that I've ever seen and known, and I never looked at him that way. And he's just an incredible dude. He's a curmudgeon. He's like a mix of Oscar and Felix and Oscar in the Odd Couple. But he's charitable. He's giving. He's loving. Raises his voice. He's a little bit of a crazy dude, but he's just phenomenal. Love my mom immensely. I see the snapshots of that so much, no matter what their marriage may have looked like. My brother was my second father. Kind of, very overbearing in a lot of different ways. But the truth is, I let him down a lot of ways. He's finding the steroids I'm trying to sell along with the weed. Your brother's an idiot. That's what he thinks. He has every right to. Going to jail. Your brother's an idiot. You have every right to. Crash the car, lose your license for 2 years. T-bone the car in your 280ZX after you're trying to compete in a bodybuilding contest and then end up in jail, a couple weeks before their wedding. You're an idiot. He has every right to think that, there's something going on with his brother. He has every right to not trust his brother. He has every right to be worried and concerned that his brother's going to end up in another psych ward. Every single right in the world to think that. 2 years ago, he's calling me for parental advice. 2 years ago, he's calling me because something's going on with his son as his son goes off to college and he's concerned about the well-being of his son. And he calls me and he says he needs Uncle Cleveland, because that's what they call me, because I'm still now a 44-year-old man-child. And that's a gift. That's something that, is absolutely unfathomable compared to the guy that I tried to show in who I was 17 years ago, where now my brother is asking me what's going on with his son. It sounds like he needs a friend. And I end up driving up to Rhode Island, to Providence, where he was going to school. And I went up there and I just literally said, sounds like you need a friend. And I started sharing things about myself and this separation that I felt that I know he does. And he's not an alcoholic or a drug addict, definitely has some of the traits, has a very active mind. Like, I try to give him spiritual literature and things and prayer and meditation. I don't want to come off like some zealot. But that is one of the biggest gifts I've experienced in recovery, is that ability for that relationship, for him and my sister-in-law to feel and know that their children are trusted with me. I am someone that can give advice. I am someone that will show up. And, I went up there 3 different times on my own because he needed somebody. I went up there, he had a problem with the school disciplinarians because he was more or less getting bullied. And I went up there to be there for his hearing and stuff like that. And that's priceless for me. I always also I'm reminded, and these things I heard in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and I believe them to be true because of my experience sober. I heard a gentleman say, recovery is not a spectator sport. And I had to really see that in my time in recovery. And these empty wells I've gone to in recovery. I had said about glazing over in 6 and 7, and later on in sponsorship and some other literature, and really seeing where my alcoholism breathes and is palpable in these defects of character that separate me. And I had mentioned to you about the disease of bulimia. And, I was maybe 2 years sober, a year sober, and I was fully bulimic, 310 pounds in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, sponsoring guys, doing things and doing that. I wasn't honest with my sponsor, wasn't honest with anybody about what was going on inside of me. And doing things also in sobriety, where doing questionable things with an ex-girlfriend who was engaged at the time. And my rationalizing, justifying mind was saying, well, she was your girlfriend first, and doing things outside of spiritual integrity, and not living by spiritual principles, because I had said to you, I do everything for the effect. I drink for the effect produced by alcohol. I eat for the effect. I spend for the effect. I spend money I don't have to impress people I don't like, because what better way to impress you than to spend money on you and make myself out to be something. My aunt dies and I inherited $40,000 along with 27 other people. She saved $1.3 million and gave $40,000 to 27 nieces and nephews. And I got myself out of debt and put myself back into debt, stone cold sober, because I spend for the effect. I might as well have nice things. That always reminds me when I was younger and I was a bodybuilder, and I could go to the gym and I would lift, 140 pound dumbbells with ease, but I felt like I could only lift 5 pounds when I left the gym, like this physical appearance that I had and whatever it was, but I was a shell of a man in so many different ways. And I get into relationships for the effect, because what better way to change God is to have a higher power and be able to focus my attentions in relationships and feel love, or what I think is love. And then I end up fat, in debt, and with a hostage, stone cold sober, and I'm wondering what exactly happened. My life's burning down. I smell the smoke a little bit, but I don't even realize what's going on, because I'm awake, but at the same time, this powerlessness and this agnosticism and this unmanageability is showing up in other areas. It's not showing up in a bottle of gin anymore. It's showing it up in a 270-pound, 5'11" guy who looks like me, talks like me, and walks like me. And thank God for continuing to grow in the steps. And also, what really helped and what really did it as a new person was, once being sponsored and going in and doing those amends and practicing 10 and 11, is sponsoring, like having those conversations with other men and going through the work with other men, and and getting that big book vernacular. And like, I'm a big book ninja. Like, I can quote it up and down. I'm a black belt, fluent black belt in big book. I could like reference pages and all that stuff. And I hung out onto that, a lot of pride and ego for a long time, and a lot of arrogance. But how am I living it? And how humble am I to the fact that, that really this boils down to God's grace and Alcoholics Anonymous. Also during that time, in the, now going on 4 years, I went back to school a couple of times in sobriety, traveled, did a lot of awesome stuff, sober vacations, traveled with my dad to a couple of different places. But I went back to school. And the amazing thing is that I finished school, because I am, as I've always heard, I'm a great starter and poor finisher. I've gone back to school numerous times in sobriety. I've gone back to school numerous times in my life, but I actually finished school. And I went back to school, and I went to Union County Community College up in Union, New Jersey, and I ended up going to nursing school. Graduated now almost 4 years. And I always think about this with my mom too, because where I am in the nursing field is, my mother passed away from malignant melanoma, and now I'm an oncology nurse, and I worked oncology, med surg, and hospice at Clara Moss in Belleville, New Jersey for my first 2.5 years. And now I work in outpatient chemotherapy at Staten Island University Hospital, the hospital I went to that day of, November 30th, 2003. And now they pay me, and I'm hired by them. My HR was, across the street from where I used to go into 450 Seaview every day when my dad would pick me up. Like, that's not me. That's the stuff I learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and learned how to live sober. One of my favorite lines in the big book is, and always remembering it too, and talking about this with men that I get the opportunity to sponsor, as well as when I get the opportunity to share in a meeting, is that lack of power is my dilemma. And I'm reminded again through sponsorship, and I love my sponsor very much. And I'm not just saying that because his wife's on the meeting. But his sponsor reminds and says, he always says, it will never be for lack of knowledge. It will always be for lack of power. And those were one of those shots across the bow when I started suffering in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, stone cold sober, is that I had a lot of knowledge, but I forgot that I lacked power. And remembering through sponsorship again that I suffer from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. My job is not going to conquer it. My brother's belief and faith and trust in me is not going to conquer it. The fact that I have recently become engaged and a gift of a wonderful, incredible woman in my life, and we're going to get married in a couple of months. She fully well knows what she's getting invested into, and she knows she's not going to fix me. And she knows also that it is not her responsibility to fix me. And it is not your responsibility to fix me either. It really is looking at that brokenness and that frailty that I have had in the rooms of AA, and realizing that God has never left me. When I've come to the end of my own resources, Alcoholics Anonymous and God have always been there. They have never left. They're the practice of it and the principles of it are they're there. It's my responsibility to fall more into that and experience that kind of stuff. The other thing along this journey has been service in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got out of a relationship in AA, and I came out of a shell of a man. I was doing things I didn't want to do, saying things I didn't want to say, acting ways I didn't want to act. I had gotten out of that relationship finally. Thank God for sponsorship. I left that relationship. I gave her money. I told her, I will be responsible for any bill and rent for the next 6 months. You do not have to think about anything, but I cannot do this anymore. I cannot be here. And thank God for my sponsor at that time. And I did a 4th step. I had 35 resentments just towards this, this young woman herself, and the collateral damage that goes along with it. And something happened at that time where I got involved with a young people's group and I became their GSR. And I started falling in love with Alcoholics Anonymous in a completely different way. And I started doing service below the group level, and I started falling in love with AA. I got to become the island archivist, which is, more or less a file keeper. But I ended up like reading books and learning about how AA came to be, and still a lot more learning and knowledge I could have in that. But fall in love with it again. Became a DCMC, alternate DCMC in my county, and a DCMC. And also at that time, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I also had double hip replacement. At the time, I was an alternate, DCMC, and I stayed tethered in service. And I had to leave nursing school because I needed a double hip replacement. And I had to, leave nursing school and come back to nursing school. And that was another thing that I went through sober that I didn't, couldn't imagine. I'm going through that sober. I had to take pain medication. I'm leaving nursing school. I had left another relationship that I thought was the relationship, and the rug got swept out from underneath me. I was 39 at the time, and I had my right one done and then my left one done. And I was still real tethered in AA. I was having sponsees come to the house. I was, I actually in this room, I had a bed. My father set a bed up in this room for it. And like when I was saying before about like time-wise, like my reference point of life is now 17 years of getting through life without buying into the lie that booze is going to treat my alcoholism. But it really started from an experience with a man being willing to open up a book that was written by men and women 85 some odd years ago to show me and us what alcoholism is, not what I think it is. And it gives me the recipe on how to treat it in all its shapes and forms, from 12 steps to 12 traditions to concepts. And where I said before about not treating it as a spectator sport, and I'm grateful for the guidance I've had in current sponsorship and past sponsorship, to remain a player in the game, to be willing to show up, to not only be willing to sponsor, but to also share that experience in the rooms of AA, to be an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous in AA, like what that really means. And, now I'm a DCM in my district, and we're doing a New Year's Eve alcothon, and that's been really cool. But I know that foundation that was laid, especially those first 2-3 years, and 1, 2, and 3, and moving forward, and everything that's come past that, the good and the bad, was not the man who has the life he has today, the job, the fiance, the car, the esteem of friends and family, the love of friends and family was not possible 17 years ago. I didn't feel it was tangible. It didn't even feel it was probable, but then what became probable in Alcoholics Anonymous then came possible in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then it became reality in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm so grateful also for sponsorship now with the inventories that we do every night, my sponsor and the guys that he sponsors, and we share this level of accountability and transparency. I don't know where I would be without inventory, 11-step inventory. My prayer and meditation is not as good as I like it. I would like it. It is not. It needs work. Wrong. It doesn't need work. It needs commitment and discipline. That's what it needs. I don't struggle with it. I'm not committed and disciplined enough. And I have to be, because I know that feeds my soul. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share with you guys tonight. I know that the 50-minute mark is up. I know, and I may not 100% but I know that the life I have today is God's grace in AA. The man who was, 17 years ago when I'd share with you, that stuff's not possible. And I'm just really grateful. And I thank you guys so much.